Yeah, then hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, and really happy to have you. Today's webinar on pricing KPIs. My name is Tim Schneider. I'm the head of customer value here at Buynomics, and I previously worked at BCG, working with a couple of CPG companies and clients there. And I will be moderating today's meeting and answer any of the questions that you might have today in the chat, or of course afterwards via email if you like. Of course, if you have any other questions around the solution or just on topic here, also feel free to hit me up with those questions. With me today is our founder, Dr. Ingo Reinhardt, who has more than 14 years of experience in the area of pricing, is a very strong topic expert, and developed our Buynomics method. So thank you for being here with us, Ingo. And before jumping into the topic, I would like to give a quick overview about Buynomics as a platform. So for all of you, Buynomics is essentially a revenue management and pricing solution and / platform, which is developed to provide you with an overall holistic optimization and analysis approach with very high predictive accuracy and increased speed to insights. And with all of those, basically should provide you with better profitability and enable you to just make better decisions faster. And if you have, of course, any questions around Buynomics, how we work for our clients, feel free after the webinar to contact me via email. And without further ado now, I would suggest to hand over to Ingo. Ingo.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for the intro, and welcome everyone for joining this webinar. As Tim said, if there are any questions, just drop them or write them into the chat, and we're happy to discuss them towards the end of the webinar. And yeah, we're really looking forward to that. I think we have some new and fresh ideas. If you think they're not good, then please also let us know. Happy to discuss those at the end. And with this, let's get started. I think there's one thing that when we get into the topic of KPIs is that something that I'm seeing more than I hope, and I hope you also are aware of this. So many cases also in our field use the term key KPIs, which doesn't really make sense. Tim has also seen this quite a lot in our work and on LinkedIn everywhere. KPI already means key performance indicators, so putting a key in front of that isn't really helpful. And I think this is a good way to start. And beyond the pure wordplay, there are also, of course, some other challenges with setting KPI, and just to highlight how important it is to have the proper KPIs. One of the key effects, and we won't spend too much time on this here, but I think it's useful as an introduction, is what's known as the Cobra Effect. And this happens when you're measuring the wrong thing. And let's start with the first example here. The original case where the Cobra Effect came from is that during the British rule in India, they saw a challenge or a problem of the form that they found that there was a cobra plague in many of the territories, and the idea was the way to get rid of it was by incentivizing or measuring, essentially, and that's the KPI, how many cobras or dead cobras were brought to the government by the people in the different districts, and they measured success in the number of dead cobras that they collected. Of course, the problem that arises from this immediately is then when people are incentivized to hand over dead cobras, they start farming them, and that, of course, led to an increase in the problem of cobras. There were, in the end, many more cobras than there were initially. Another similar challenge was when in the US in the 1860s, the US wanted to rapidly build out the railroad system in the US. They launched a project where they incentivized or measured as a key KPI the mileage of track laid, which led to the fact that builders didn't go the shortest way, but they added many turns and curves and everything to make the distance longer, which was of course not the intention. So these are just two examples. I won't go into the third one, but these are just two examples, not from our pricing and RGM field, but in general to highlight that it's important to have the proper KPIs and really understand the dynamics if you then incentivize these KPIs. One that's a bit closer to heart, I think, is the one we have here from B2B pricing. And also from my previous experience in consulting, I've seen this actually quite a lot, is that salesmen are incentivized by something like the selling price that they have, or the average selling price, implying that the salesperson who gets the highest average selling price is the most successful one. But of course, as we all know, when we've seen price elasticities at work, is that there's a strong relationship between the price and the sales volume, in this case, the success rate. And as you would expect, typically higher prices lead to a lower success rate. And in this example here, what we observe, and this is actually, if you do this in many projects across different customers, you actually do see this quite a lot in practice, is that the selling price doesn't correlate too strongly with the profit achieved by these different salespeople. And in this case, it's an example just to highlight the effect, but it's not too far away from reality. The salesperson with the highest average selling price here, 100 euros, makes the lowest profit because it has the lowest success rate, and the person with the lowest average selling price makes the highest profit. So these are things that are crucial, and where the wrong KPIs, the wrong incentives can really cause a problem. And what we want to understand is how we can actually improve that. What are the proper KPIs to not make this mistake, but actually help the team make better decisions. I would say at the core, when we talk about pricing and revenue management, the KPIs, I was almost attempted to say key KPIs, but the target KPIs are actually very simple. In pricing, they're typically two, and that is profit and revenue. Those are the two things that are closest to what we do or can affect with our price and portfolio decisions. And as an organization, it's very simple. You could just, for example, say we're just aiming for profit maximization, and then everything that helps the organization achieve the profit optimal price, it helps the organization to improve. And likewise, we could also say that the organization might be aiming for revenue optimization. And the way to do that, there are actually two tasks that the organization has to achieve this objective. One is value creation, and it's a bit oversimplified. This is actually what everyone outside of pricing and revenue management does in the organization. By innovation, new products, better logistics, better service and processes, and so on, they improve they perform value creation. And what this does is essentially it pushes out the efficient boundary of what the organization can achieve as a combination of revenue and profit. And what we do in pricing and revenue management is to get closer to this efficient boundary here by making better pricing and product decisions. And in the end, and we just so that you see that's not just our opinion, but in the end, this shouldn't be controversial. Many large organizations, and here are two examples of them, really aim for sustainable growth or profitable growth, which typically is somewhere in the middle of the pure profit optimization and the pure revenue optimization. And what we in revenue management and pricing do is try via value capture is try to get closer to this efficient boundary that the rest of the organization has prepared for us. So in the end, the KPIs we're aiming for, the target KPIs, are very, very simple. They're typically revenue and profit, and what the organization is aiming for, and it helps not just the revenue management team, but everyone to actually be very explicit in the split between the two. So what combination of profit and revenue optimization the organization is aiming for. From our experience, there are, and this is what we propose just to structure the subject. there are 4 levels with which an organization can approach KPIs, and also the intensity with which it deals with the topic. The first and simplest one is something the way in which KPIs are used, for example, a margin to equalize. You have a portfolio, let's say, of 10 products. They all have different margins, and maybe some margins are very high in percent, some are very low, and they might even be the one with a very high percentage margin doesn't sell that well. The one with the low percentage margin, you see there's potential. One very easy way to work with a KPI such as a percentage margin is to try to have the same percentage margin for all products. Let's say 40%, you have your current range is somewhere between 30 and 50%, and you say that for whatever reason, the right percentage margin is 40% for my products, and this is what you achieve. So this is, I would say, the most basic use of KPIs. A little bit more advanced use of KPIs is to differentiate, typically by something like a price elasticity, where you say, okay, I have in what way ever measured price elasticity, either with some very basic regression model or with a survey or with more advanced technology. You have determined that you have different price elasticities for your product, and typically you would have the products where there is lower price elasticities, you can have a higher margin, and the products where the price elasticity is higher, you can only achieve a lower margin, or should aim for a lower margin. So you differentiate by something like a price elasticity, or you differentiate by something like market share, something like that. Something very basic. A bit more advanced is what we call theory-based steering. And this really acquires for the organization to have a theory of how to gain long-term profitable growth. For example, an organization says, okay, because of the dynamics in my industry, it makes sense to first gain massive market share because you're, for example, running a platform like LinkedIn or some other marketplace, where initially you need to aim for a high market share. And once you've achieved high market share, you can then increase prices because customers have few choices. Everyone needs to go to the one central player like LinkedIn, for example, and then you can be very profitable. So, and the way to steer that would be first to look at market share development, and at a later point in time, then look at profitability, revenue, and all of these numbers. Another theory could be that you strongly believe in behavioral pricing or behavioral economics, and you want to build something like a good, better, best portfolio and set up your pricing accordingly, and then hope to get higher profitability because you played the behavior of your customers very well, and that leads to higher profit. So the idea is, and that what differentiated from the number 2 here, is that you really have a much more elaborate theory of what drives performance, what drives profitable growth for the organization, and then you need to identify the proper KPIs underneath that. The fourth one, and this really is something that really has emerged over the past, that with much more advanced technology, you also have the option to really replace many of the more manual tasks that I just described in these steps 1 to 3, and replace them with like a automatic optimization, technology-based optimization. And this is, from our point of view, really the most advanced form of using KPIs, using technology to not just measure these KPIs, but also working with them and optimizing prices or the overall portfolio of an organization. And just to conclude this graph here, there are, of course, also very different levels of effort associated with these different levels. Typically, they would increase as you use from 1 to 3 more insights, more capability, more KPIs need to measure more. But then with the use of technology, some of that effort is taken over by the technology, so that the overall effort measured in time spent preparing and so on can decline towards the full optimization. Just to highlight, I want to show a very brief example. And Tim, please tell me if you can, once you can see my screen. You see my browser now? Perfect. So in this example, we have just a very basic portfolio, good, better, best portfolio. We have cost 379 euros or dollars, and we have prices of 15, 10, 5, 10, and 15 euros. And what we have here, as I described, these three products, we have different prices, we have different margins. So this is our status quo, and we now have, as I explained, these different we're looking at the KPI, very simplified margin. We see that we have 40% the first product, 30 in the middle, and then 40 again. And one theory, and this is based on the what I explained before, is could say, okay, here the margin is too low in the middle. Let's put everything on a 40% margin, and that would imply this price change here. So we increase the price here from 10 euro to 11.60, and we see that we have slightly increased our profit by roughly 3% in this example. So this would be the most basic use of a KPI margin and in this case, this improves profitability, overall profit. It reduces revenue, but it increases the profit here. Another method would be, we go back to the base prices. We could look at a way to differentiate our margins here, and we see that we have in the good product, the cheapest one, the highest elasticity, 2.5. We have 1.7 in the middle and 1.0 in the best product. And one way could be to say, okay, let's have differentiated margins. Let me just go back to the base price. So we could say we have 40% in the base product, and then in the better product we go, let's say, 2.5 percentage points higher to a price of 12.20, and then for the best product we go for the highest margin of 45%. So we have differentiated margin, and in this case, because we have applied more insights, we use price elasticity to set the prices as a KPI, we have a higher profit in this case. We might also say, okay, let's apply, and this is the theory-based approach, behavioral pricing in this case, and let's set up the portfolio such that we increase the price here of the lowest product, because we don't actually want this much sales on the lowest product. We want most of the sales here, and we also don't want too much sales on this high product, but we actually want to use it to increase the price perception of this middle product here, so that we have many more customers going to this middle option, and then we hope that we have the proper or an increase in profitability in this case. Let's look at these different cases here. So we have the status quo, and we have the case where we have the 40% margin in each case. Because we increase the price, we have a little bit fewer sales, but if we look at profit, we see that we're about these 3% higher. This is what I showed before. So we have an improvement, and we also already looked at the case where we differentiate margins, where we have at a good product 40%, then 42.5 and 45% margin. This is even a bit more profitable. Let's look at the behavioral example, where we say, okay, let's try to move more sales to the middle option. And we could, as a KPI, look at sales on this middle option here, the better case. We see that this has in fact worked, but that doesn't correlate very well with overall profitability. This is much less profitable than all of the other options, actually. And the last one is, we could also, and this is where the technology comes into play, really look at the actual optimum for this case, and we see that here we can gain roughly another 3% in profit compared to the best solution. So this is just the line of these different theories, and it already shows that with having something very basic, depending on where the status quo is, you can already improve your profitability. If you then differentiate based on something that's really robust, you can improve further. A theory-based approach that requires lots and lots of KPIs to steer it in the right direction can really be tricky, and it has to really have massive support to improve. And of course, the best you can do is really do the technology-based full optimization of profit, if this is what you're targeting at as a KPI. So this is just to highlight the different cases here with this very simple example, but you can really do the same exercise with all realistic sizes of examples and with your day-to-day tasks. Let's go back to the presentation. Tim, can you see the PowerPoint again?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, so and this is really what we highlighted. So you come from a status quo, and typically the more elaborate your KPI use is, the closer you can get to the profitable growth boundary here. In our case, the 3 was a bit worse than the status quo, but this was in this case because it was based on a theory that didn't properly work. All right, so let's start based on this example. Let's look a bit more in a structured way at KPIs. And I think from our point of view, as we said, we have in pricing, we're in a good situation, pricing and revenue management, that really the target KPIs are really straightforward. It's always profit, revenue, or a combination of these two. And what's often really done, and this is also what we use in this example, is that they can be differentiated and should be differentiated. For example, if you're a global organization, by country, and within countries, by category, product. So you have your profit, your margins, your revenue, everything by product, by channel, customer segment, and over time. So it's always important to differentiate. You always need to do this if you, for example, want to use it to steer, for example, based on a price list or something else. And then you have, after the target KPIs, what we call the drivers of these KPIs. So something where you say, okay, this is something we measure. We don't really aim to have a certain price elasticity, but we expect, based on price elasticity, we can say that our prices, and those are the things we can steer, or our portfolio isn't right. And we use these drivers to then optimize and steer our decision making. And typically these are the obvious ones, like margins, price elasticity, promotion spend, return on promotion investment, and so on. So there's a whole range of these and the selection of these really depends on the type of theory you're using on how to achieve long-term profitable growth. And the third category of these key KPIs is really the RGM organization KPI. So the things you need to do in the background to really work with these drivers and target KPIs. For example, what KPIs do you use to steer your team, the size, revenue per FTE, and so on. Then data availability, maturity. Do you have the proper data in place? How do you measure what data you have in place? How do you measure, for example, what's done quite a lot is measure data maturity. Do you really have the data you need for the different applications that you're aiming for? How do you measure your processes? How long does it take you to make a price change, for example? And do you have the proper technology underneath what you're doing? So for something like what share of price decisions or portfolio decisions are you running through technology, and what share are you still doing manually? So these are the things. And if we then focus on one specific industry, here we use the example of the CPG industry, where we say in the end, it's, as we said, and it's always what you have in pricing is profit, in this case, net sales growth together as the target KPIs. And these are typically differentiated by product and retailer within a country, and then of course also across countries. And then they're typically aggregated by brand, category, whatever is relevant for the organization and whatever can be used to steer the portfolio. And this is obviously then also tracked over time to see improvements or areas where you're getting worse. And then depending, as I said, depending on the theory of how to achieve the target KPIs, profit and net sales growth, there's a range of different drivers of these target KPIs that need to be measured to achieve the objective. For example, if your theory is that an increase or more or better use of promotions really drives profitable growth in the end, then you need to measure that you're using the right amount of promotions to support this theory. And also, as we said, you have underneath these organizational KPIs, typically something like data maturity score, where you understand, do you have the proper and the right data to make these decisions? Do you have the sales data? Are you running the right amount of surveys? Do you have the proper product knowledge, competitor price, everything like this? And this measured via the appropriate KPIs. Also, what's often don't have on the list, but also often plays an important role when you employ technology or even very basic technology like a price elasticity, is that you measure how precise your predictions are. Of course, always if you use the data properly, if you use something like a price elasticity, you always need to know in the end, does the prediction based on the price elasticity or some other model really work out in reality then afterwards? So these are the things that you need to measure in this case. And what we added here, won't go through the full list, but we'll have it in the material afterwards that we share, is I think it makes sense to employ a checklist like this that really goes through the different steps in developing the KPI landscapes that really matches the requirements of the specific case. So you need to understand what are your target KPIs, typically a combination of profit and revenue growth. Then what are the key drivers based on your theory? From very simple, where you just want to equalize, something like having the same margin across all products or the same price difference versus your competitors, or you want to differentiate, for example, based on price elasticity, which is the most common one. You need to have the price elasticity and then track that you're following this differentiation approach. Or you have something much more elaborate like theory-based steering. We had the very simple example of behavioral pricing in the example that we discussed, but it can be anything based on market shares or anything else. Then you also need to be able to track that and measure with the appropriate KPIs. And then in the end, of course, you always need to look at the RGM organization measures. Do you have the proper data? How is the team performance measured? What's the technology status? For example, what share of decisions do you make via technology? And how do you measure that? Looking at the time, I would skip the last two and go straight to the Q&A.
Yes, thanks a lot, Ingo. We had a couple of questions in the chat. I'm already about to answer a couple of them, but to give you first idea of another question here, it's like overall, which data do you use for the Buynomics model?
Yeah, so the example that we showed here, that of course was a theoretical example to highlight the different effects. But the data that's used really depends on the industry that employs. Every industry has a different set of data. With the CPG example, like consumer goods, they usually have sellout data, so they have they have full transparency on a channel level, for example, in a country, what happens with their own prices and sales, also with their competitor prices and sales, so that this can be used to parameterize the model. In other industries, they, for example, work a lot with, they have, for example, their own transaction data, maybe less transparency on what competitors do, or we can also work, for example, with all kinds of survey data. I think as a general rule, the solution can use all the pricing data that's typically used, ranging from real sales data, transaction data to survey data, but also expert judgment on price elasticities in segments or value to the customer in different segments. So the solution really works with all the available pricing data.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think another question that came in was, is it possible to analyze different level of granularity with your tool at the same time? I would assume the question is around basically, when I understand correctly, to measure or to basically display channel level, retailer level, product level at the same time.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. The solution, I mean, in this simple example that we showed, there were only 3 products, but in reality, you have different product, many more than 3. You have different channels, and the solution can really show the KPIs from the target, profit, revenue, sales, but also elasticity, margins, everything else at every level of granularity that's put in the data, right? So it needs the input data needs to be at that level, but then you can have all kinds of aggregations. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I think in light of time, I would say we skip the rest of the questions. Is that all right with you, Ingo?
Yeah, well, we can answer them by email afterwards. When next Monday, we'll send out the link to the recording, the presentation, and we will also answer the remaining questions then.
Perfect, great. Then, okay, I think to give you all a heads up, so the next webinar is of course coming. So the next one, the history of future and revenue growth management. Yeah, feel free to click in there as well, and stay tuned for all the other webinars that are still coming. I think also very interesting, the evil price elasticities. Very, very interesting topic coming in August, and then the next one at the end of August. So thanks everybody for joining today's webinar. And again, reach out please via LinkedIn, via email. We're happy to connect, answer all of the remaining questions also via email. And yeah, have a great weekend.
Yeah, also thanks from my side. Have a good weekend. Hope you have equally good weather as we have here. Looking forward to seeing you in our next events. Thanks.